Wake up, Tenno.
Welcome back, Tenno. It's been a while. I promise I'm not dead, just a series of life events that put a slow on my ability to get out videos for a while. Hopefully that's behind us now. We're starting off with a build for Lavos that will put Alad V to shame with the amount of intergalactic treaties he violates while waging chemical warfare against his enemies. Best part is, it's an extremely versatile build, so you don't have to use all the same stuff I do to make it work, because it's Lavos and that's just how he rolls, or skates, or whatever it is he does. There's a lot to dive into here. Lavos isn't exactly the most beginner-friendly frame, but I'll do what I can to make him easy enough to understand. Before you even start to look at his abilities, as you first look at his paper sheet, you may right away notice that his stats are all sorts of abnormal looking. To start out with, he doesn't have energy. It's because all of his abilities have cooldowns rather than costing energy. Cast an ability, and as soon as that cooldown is up, you can cast that ability again. Even abilities that you've put on him via the helmet system. Next, you'll see that he doesn't have a base efficiency stat. Efficiency on Lavos directly affects the amount of cooldown reduction provided by his transmutation probe that we'll talk about here in a minute, and that's it. But that cooldown reduction helps you get your abilities back insanely quick if your build needs it. Last weird stat you should see is this extra thing of status duration down here, because the normal duration stat on Lavos acts both as normal, extending the duration of your abilities, and it also directly affects and extends your status duration with a 1-for-1 percentage. If you have the base 100 duration, your inflicted status effects will last their normal time. If you have 150% duration, your status effects will last 50% longer than normal, so 6 seconds of toxin status becomes 9 seconds, etc. Already, Lavos is different from any other frame, and we haven't even looked at his abilities, so let's dive into these, starting with his passive. Lavos' passive does two things. First is that energy and universal orbs give him 10 seconds of status immunity. Fairly basic, and unlike how it typically works, Lavos can pick up energy orbs despite having no visible energy pool. This also means he will pick them up back to back though, so if you're the type who's trying to spread them out or conserve them, don't run over them if you don't need the immunity. The second half of his passive is what starts to get crazy. Each one of Lavos' 4 skills has an element attached to it, and conveniently, there is a kind of cheat sheet attached to Lavos' unique UI component over here above your weapon and skills. If you just click the skill, it casts the skill, obviously. Pressing 1 casts Ophidian Bite, and as our cheat sheet shows us, Ophidian Bite is a toxin skill, and will deal toxin damage to the target. If you hold the skill, however, you'll see that instead of casting it, it sucks the element up into his little alchemy mixer here. Once it's there, whatever skill you cast next will do its normal type of damage plus the damage type in the alchemy mixer here. So since we sucked up Toxin, if we now use his 3, which is an electric skill, we will see both Toxin and electric damage dealt. Now to complicate it more, you can mix these elements by holding down one skill, then holding down another. For example, if we hold down his cold skill, then hold down his Toxin skill, they will mix together to make Viral. And now the next time we cast a skill, it will do the skill's element type plus the viral damage we've now mixed. This allows Lavos to imbue anything from viral to up damage to the specific weaknesses of the enemies he's fighting directly into his abilities. It should also be noted here that imbuing a non-damaging status effect on an ability will apply 3 procs of that status on the enemy when you do this. Well, now that the confusing part is out of the way, his abilities themselves are fairly straightforward. Before we get too deep in here though, it would help this channel out greatly if you'd take a second to click the like, subscribe, and little bell icons down below there to let YouTube know that you want to see more of these kinds of videos. The more comments and likes, the more YouTube spreads this around, and the more this channel can grow and put increasingly better content out for Tenno like you. I truly appreciate all the help and interaction from all of you so far, and there's lots more to come. Anyway, back to our resident Snake Master. His first skill is Ophidian Bite, and it does just what it says. Lavos' little snake pets fling out, hit an enemy, and do damage and heal Lavos. Both the damage and the healing amount are scaled by strength. The range is scaled with range. This is his toxin-based skill. His second ability is Vile Rush. He charges in the direction you're going and flings little explosive alchemy bottles out around him that deal damage and apply their status effect. The scaling on this one is weird, as the range stat scales the radius of the vial explosions and the distance at which Lavos skates forward. The distance he goes forward then scales the number of vials thrown out. Strength scales the damage the vials do, and duration scales how long the pools last that the vials leave behind. This is his cold ability. His third ability is Transmutation Probe. This is his skill that can reduce the cooldown on all his other skills except Transmutation Probe itself. Damage scales with strength, but who cares, as the most important thing here is the range, which obviously scales with range and lets you hit more enemies with it, and then the cooldown reduction, which scales with the efficiency mentioned earlier. At max efficiency, this recharges a little over 2.5 seconds per enemy hit, so with a large enough range and/or enough enemies around, you can use this to instantly reduce even your longest cooldowns. When you use the ability, the probe goes out and travels at a speed that doesn't scale, but you can stop the probe where it's at by hitting 3 again after the probe has been in flight for at least half a second. Any orbs or ammo packs that go into the probe's field will be turned into universal packs of that type. This is Lavos' electric ability. His fourth and final ability is Catalyze, which sends out probes in a circle around Lavos that douse enemies in fire, and the damage dealt is scaled with strength, then doubled for each element afflicting the enemy. That means IPS and weird status effects like lifted, microwave, etc. do not affect it. These probes travel through obstacles, but have to physically touch enemies to do damage to them. Given the right situations, this can deal some pretty immense damage and can produce multiple additional heat procs at that damage when imbued with heat from his passive, and then doubled by Archon Vitality. For our build here today, we're not worried about the cooldown of our abilities because we will be primarily making use of an augment for Lavos called Valence Formation that allows us to infuse our elements onto our weapons as well as our abilities. We're also going to run a melee weapon with a forced electric proc, so we don't need to infuse electric on anything. So we're going to helminth over our Transmutation Probe with Cedo 9's Evade ability. With 2 specific elemental effects, gas and electric, having the ability to hit weak spots, we can make use of these to consistently make weak point kills on enemies and keep Evade up full time. Do keep in mind that when you put a helminth subsume over one of Lavos' abilities, he loses the ability to put the element of what is originally there in his alchemy mixer. In this case, I chose to ditch out electric from his 3 because we are getting the forced electric proc from our weapon, and I wanted to be able to create gas and viral with his kit. But you may opt to put it over something else in his kit, such as his 2, if you want to keep around your ability to infuse electric on its own, or for corrosive. I would personally avoid replacing his toxin or heat abilities on 1 and 4, as gas will significantly help you with damage output and the ability to stay invisible on this build. So as you can tell, Lavos is, well, he's a lot to process. So let's go over the builds and load out first, and then talk about the gameplay loop. First up is Lavos himself. For our aura, this is the first of many things that is able to be exchanged based on whatever else you decide to run yourself. In this case, we're running Combat Discipline to both trigger Arcane Avenger for a flat 45% crit buff, and to intentionally hurt ourselves so we can heal ourselves to proc Archon Intensify to get our full 60% strength bonus out of it. For defense, we're running Rolling Guard, which doesn't seem like much on its own, but since in theory we should be invisible 100% of the time, this gives us some leeway for when we inevitably mess it up. Because let's be real, we're not all professional gamers. If our invis goes out, Rolling Guard will give us a few seconds to get out of there and buy some time until Evade comes back up. We're running Archon Continuity and Narrow-Minded to boost our duration and thus our status duration, and using the Archon version so we can get Corrosive in the mix with our Ophidian Bite that then gets spread around from our pet. Blind Rage and Archon Intensify get our strength up, which ultimately isn't that important, but it does give us a boost to the healing from our Ophidian Bite and our Evade to keep our health topped off, and lets our other abilities pack a little more punch when we use them. Archon Intensify can be procced by our Ophidian Bite, our Evade, and our pet running Medkit, so it should be up 100% of the time. Archon Vitality is here to give us some extra health in case we accidentally kill too much too fast, as well as give us extra heat procs from our 4 if we use that. Why not? That leaves us with our last 3 spots. First of them is going to go to Valence Formation, as that's the mod that turns Lavos into a weapons platform, allowing us to infuse our elements from our passive we discussed earlier onto his weapons at a 200% damage bonus. The other two, including our Exilus spot, are basically flex spots. I'm running PSF here because getting knocked down is annoying, but if you're running secondary fortifier or something like that, it could be swapped out into whatever you want. I put PSF in after I encountered the feature I'll talk about later, and removed secondary fortifier so as not to give the impression that this build relied upon said feature. The last slot I have Vigorous swap in, but you could also swap this for stretch or pretty much whatever you want to fit your individual playstyle. Honestly, I tend to run stretch here unless I'm diving into something post-game with 4-digit levels. Only thing left here is the second arcane slot, which we're going to run Fury on for some base damage to our melee. With all that in place, puts us at 254% duration, meaning our base status effects like Toxin will last for 15 seconds. We have a 25-second base duration on Evade with a max of 38 seconds, and we add 5 seconds to our current timer with every weak point kill. Given the electric and gas procs traveling through Influence, you can see why we shouldn't have much issue keeping a 100% uptime on our Evade. So we'll move into the melee weapon. I'm using Xoris here as an example because it's easy to come by, and I have a Riven for it. The Falcor will serve the same purpose. All that matters is that your weapon force procs electricity, as the point we're going for is to force proc electric to trigger melee influence, allowing us to change our infused element to whatever suits us whenever and still spread that easily. Primarily, we want to use damaging AoE effects like Gas and Blast, so since those scale off base damage, we want to crank up the damage output that our Valence Formation will then multiply. So looking at the bones of this build, your stance doesn't matter, because it's a glaive and all we're doing is throwing it. In Exilus slot, we've got Dispatch Overdrive for some extra speed, and there's nothing else that really helps us in that slot. We're running Virulent Scourge and Vicious Frost for viral and status, plus Weeping Wounds to add additional status. We're running Galvanized Reflex because it's a thrown weapon and this is the most efficient way to do that, keeping us at a 5x combo despite our constant heavy attack explosions. Sacrificial Steel puts us at over 100% crit on its own. Amalgam Organ Shatter brings up the crit damage so that our base output is as high as possible. Volatile Quick Return is here to extend our blast radius, which is extremely important in an influence build, as the more things you can hit at once, the more procs spread at once. The faction mod here will change based on what it is you're facing, but faction damage is of course a massive boost on any status damage since it double dips and applies to the initial hit as well as the status ticks. Our base damage is coming from our frame's Arcane Fury augment, and we'll get a 200% multiplicative damage bonus from whatever element we fuse onto this from Valence Formation, leaving us with a hefty amount of damage to proc dot effects with. Moving on to the rest of the weapon, you can really run whatever you want, but I've got two suggestions for the primary, one being the Miter, as the bane of this build's existence is nullifiers, and that will deal with them. I'll show the build I've got on my Miter here, but I'm not going to go into detail with it because legitimately all that matters is neutralizing Justice to pop the bubbles. The other option here would be the one that I've been using more often than not because, well, it's new, and that's the Cedo Prime. I run Cold, Corrosive, and Magnetic on this to make use of primary Frostbite, cranking up our multi-shot because typically we're staying away from enemies on this build. If you don't mind getting close more often, Shotgun Vendetta is another viable option for Arcane, allowing you to run whatever elements you want. Diving into this build a little more, we're running Galvanized Savvy for the status and base damage, giving us 80% base damage per status and easily inflicting multiple status effects between our modded effects and the hidden force procs off the alt fire. Oh, you didn't know it did that either? Yeah. Turns out the Cedo force procs 2 random primary elements on the alt fire, completely separate and unrelated to your modded elements. Anyhow, we're running Galvanized Hell for multi-shot, again coupled with primary Frostbite to give us an additional 320% multi-shot at full stacks. We've got Shell Shock and Toxic Barrage to give corrosive and status, plus Magnetic Strafe to give us some extra fire rate and an additional status for Savvy. Prime Chilling Grasp gives us the cold plus a heavier weighting to proc Frostbite more often. Critical Deceleration and Primed Ravage give us the crit and crit damage, with the fire rate loss compensated for by the Magnetic Strafe, which we already added in. Galvanized Acceleration fills.
Hey, so future merch here. Initially, I had Galvanized Acceleration in this Cedo build, but since I recorded that part, it's come to light that Galvanized Acceleration causes the alt fire of the Cedo to act erratically and not properly bounce between targets consistently, as you can see in the background example. Long story short, don't use Galvanized Acceleration here.
Overall, this is a pretty basic build, but combined with Lavos' ability to put any element on things and how much we'll be living on his gas infusion, this gives us a way to help spread more gas around the room and headshot some additional things to keep evade up. On to our secondary, which again isn't massively important as to what you run. I opted to run the Grimoire solely because of Croc Anticle, which can provide some additional universal orbs to proc our passive status immunity. Slap Vom Invocation on for some additional strength, and Prime Fulmination to make the alt fire a little bigger. And then it's just whatever you want as far as elements. Here we're running Barrel Diffusion for multi-shot because we won't ever kill anything with it to proc the Galvanized version, Lethal Torrent and Anemic Agility to add fire rate and more multi-shot, then Pistol Pestilence and Frostbite for viral and accelerated isotope for radiation and additional fire rate. The Arcane here is where I've got to add a note. Here and in the background videos, you'll see me have Secondary Encumber equipped. Secondary Fortifier would be the ideal option here. But when I went to go test it, I found out that our lovely Hound pet has a feature using Synergized Prospectus that will proc the Secondary Arcane and give you Overguard. As this has not been confirmed to be intended or not as of the time of this video, and it is likely not intended, I didn't want to include that as part of the build and/or encourage the use of a possible issue. Literally any arcane you want will work here. Use Dexterity if you're running a setup that isn't living on initial combo, for example. So speaking of our companion, we're going to use a Hound for this. If you've tweaked other things, a Kubro with a mecha set would be an alternative, but our intention here is to spread all of the status effects all of the time, and I simply found the Hound to be more consistent with that. The Hound build absolutely doesn't matter. Any of them will work. At worst, there might be some polarity differences. This one, for the record, is a Dorma Hound with the Adlet Core, Sela Bracket, and Frax Stabilizer. He was put together for looks, not stats. As you can see, he's still got plenty of stats. For our modding, we're running Synergized Prospectus and Manifold Bond as our main priming setup, which will spread all of the elemental effects from our weapon every time he uses Prospectus. We'll be able to use it again as soon as we kill anything that he's primed. Along those same lines, we've got Repo Audit, which will do the same thing and spread status thanks to Manifold Bond, while also disarming enemies to continue creating chaos in case we mess up and drop Invis. Momentous Bond lets our Hounds steal elemental effects from the Eximus, making it extremely easy for it to kill things and proc Contagious Bond to continue the spread of all our effects. Guardian is here to help with our own shield gating and defense, and Meta-Ray is here to help us continually proc Archon Intensify without us having to do anything. Link Vitality provides more health and enhanced vitality in this setup, and Prime Pact Leader is here because all we're doing is melee kills, so it keeps our Hound near invincible due to constant healing and Overguard buildup. Vacuum is here because we don't hate ourselves. Moving on to his weapon, again, what type really doesn't matter. Just the mods that are on it, which are going to spread through Manifold Bond. In this case, we're using the Akaten, running Focus, Radon, and Magnetic Rush to get us Magnetic and Radiation, then Vicious Frost and Volcanic Edge for Blast, and Virulent Scourge and Voltaic Strike for Corrosive. This rounds us out to 4 separate status effects he spreads on his own, plus the status effects we add ourselves, all of which get spread by Contagious Bond, meaning anything we kill anywhere will almost instantly reset his skill cooldowns so he can spam his skills all day long, allowing him on his own to shield gate for us if we mess up and come out of Invis. The last thing we'll look at before getting into the gameplay is our Archon Shards, which, you guessed it, are pretty much do what you want with based on however you may tweak things. In this case, I'm running a green Tau Forge for stacks of corrosive, and 4 red Tau for critical melee damage, as purple shards won't work on him due to a lack of energy. Depending on your playstyle, you could run 2 green regular shards for full armor strip or swap a red out for a yellow for casting speed. It's all personal preference here. Okay, now for the fun part, the gameplay. Because Lavos has no energy, he's ready to go right at the start of each mission. Generally, we're going to run with gas as our infused element from Valence formation, so we'll hold 4, hold 1, and use an ability to infuse our weapons with gas. Use your 3 to go invisible and start throwing the glaive and detonating it. That's actually it. Just re-up the gas every 20 seconds and keep throwing the glaive. The more things you hit at once, the more electric procs, the better chances of keeping influence up as much as possible. The second that procs, gas and electricity both force proc on everything your glaive hits, which then forces those procs on everything repeatedly due to influence. Lower level stuff you could use 2 and 4 to run blast instead of gas to instantly vaporize things, that same mechanic. As things scale and level, heat can stack heavier and higher if you're not killing things in one glaive throw. You're sacrificing some ability to maintain full uptime on evade, but early on, that isn't so much of an issue. Electricity force procs from the Xoris alone can in theory keep evade up fully, but it's all RNG. I prefer adding the second layer with gas to assure eternal invisibility and leave behind 15 seconds of gas clouds to damage anything that walks in behind what just died. Personal preference. Your Hound will keep everything with absolutely ludicrous amounts of status on them to reduce armor and CC them with electric procs, and your job is just to apply more gas and electricity to keep your buffs going and damage incoming spawns. Easy enough, other than needing to keep an eye out for nullifiers. Should that happen, you've got Rolling Guard and the Hound's Shield Gate to keep you alive until evade is back up. Just do yourself a favor and try to keep an eye out for them, popping them with Miter or the Cedo to keep the shield down and avoid having any issues. Well, that is pretty much it on this one. Check back here, catch me when I'm live on Twitch if you have any questions, and I will see you all on the next one. Until then, happy hunting, Tenno.